and welcome to American Catholic History. If you like our podcast, be sure to rate us and give us a review wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Noelle Heaster-Crowe.
And I'm Tom Crow.
Today, we're talking about the history of Mardi Gras festivities in the United States.
So, another episode centered on New Orleans.
Well, we have had a number of those, haven't we?
I mean, it's a great city, and a number of remarkable Catholics have certainly left their mark. Margaret Hari, Henriette de Lisle, James Longstreet, the Ursuline sisters, so many others.
Well, that certainly is true, and we have either done an episode about them or are going to do an episode of so many of them in the future.
Yeah, and it would be a fantastic place to plan a pilgrimage, maybe even during Carnival.
Don't get your hopes up for that.
No time soon, but maybe.
Well, maybe. Maybe we will set up a pilgrimage to New Orleans, but let's start by letting our listeners know about Carnival so they can decide if they'd like to join us if we ever do that.
Absolutely. So, Mardi Gras and Carnival. Some of our dear listeners may be wondering why we are doing an episode about, what is essentially a celebration of Bacchanalia.
Because that is not what Mardi Gras and Carnival are about.
Of course not.
Carnival, culminating in Mardi Gras, is a season of celebration tied to the church's liturgical calendar.
Right, but like St. Patrick's Day, the common celebration most people know about nowadays is a very different thing from the real celebration and what it's actually about. Secular culture has a tendency to just latch onto the flashy externals of sacred festivals and feasts and make a spectacle of them in its own hedonistic way, leaving the sacred parts far behind.
Yeah, the parts that would challenge the conscience of the revelers if they let themselves think too much about the reality.
Yeah, and Christmas, of course, is the best example, which is why Advent is ignored.
Funny you should mention Advent, because Advent is, of course, a liturgical season before Christmas Day. Likewise with Mardi Gras, the festivities and parades and balls associated with Mardi Gras take place during the weeks prior to Lent, a period known as Carnival.
Yes, Carnival is the period between the Epiphany on January 6th and the beginning of Lent, which is, of course, Ash Wednesday. The day before Ash Wednesday is Mardi Gras, which translates into English from French as Fat Tuesday. So, Carnival begins after Epiphany and ends on Mardi Gras.
But unlike Advent, Carnival isn't an official liturgical season, and it certainly isn't a time of penitential preparation. Carnival, in contrast, is a time of continuing celebration. It's a holdover from the festive season of Christmas and a time to keep celebrating before Lent arrives.
It's an extraordinary time. And while it's not a penitential season, it does have an aspect of preparation for penance. Its name, Carnival, comes from one of two Latin phrases, either carne levare, which means to leave meat, or carne vale, which means goodbye, meat. In either case, the coming fast and abstinence of the Lenten season is indicated. So it is a time to celebrate, but even its name, Carnival, keeps the forthcoming penances in mind. And this is not the sense of the word that I had grown up hearing, the carnival is coming to town.
Yeah, and it puts a different sense on the name of Carnival Cruise Lines. I wonder how many of their customers are thinking about Lent-style penances while sailing in the Caribbean.
Yeah, probably not many. But again, secular culture takes the flashy bits and comfortably ignores the harder realities.
And Carnival, culminating in Mardi Gras, has been celebrated with festivals of various sorts for centuries in Catholic countries. So, when Catholics came to the Americas, naturally they brought their festivities with them.
The first known celebration of Mardi Gras in the New World was in 1699 when the French brothers Pierre Le Moyne d'Iberville and Jean-Baptiste Le Moyne Bienville came over with a royal mandate from King Louis XIV of France to secure the French territories in the New World. Ash Wednesday that year was on March 4th. D'Iberville sailed up the Mississippi River on Monday, March 2nd, waiting until the next day to go ashore. When they did go ashore, they knew it was Tuesday, March 3rd, so Mardi Gras. They arranged a banquet on shore that day, and in honor of the occasion, D'Iberville named the spot Pont du Mardi Gras. That spot is about 60 miles downriver from present-day New Orleans.
So the first Mardi Gras in America was in present-day Louisiana, but not in New Orleans, because New Orleans didn't exist until 1718.
Happily, the New World didn't have to wait for New Orleans to be founded to find out in a public way what Mardi Gras was. 3 years after that first Mardi Gras, Bienville founded the settlement of Mobile, present-day Mobile, Alabama, a little ways east along the Gulf. That very next year, 1703, the settlers celebrated Carnival and Mardi Gras, and Mobile has been celebrating it basically every year ever since.
Right. The only exceptions have been for war and disease, understandably.
This means that present-day Mobile, Alabama holds the claim to the longest annual Mardi Gras celebration in the New World.
But as everyone knows, nowadays New Orleans is the city most identified with Mardi Gras.
Well, of course. The French Quarter, king cake, the parades, beads, and all that jazz. Carnival and Mardi Gras happen in the way they do because civic groups called krewes make it happen.
Yes, krewes, which is spelled Krewes, started out as secret societies and outgrowths of men's social clubs, which were generally very selective and exclusive. The krewes collect dues, conduct fundraising activities, and hold member functions of various sorts during the year. But their main purpose is to host carnival activities, like a ball or a parade, and sometimes both.
The first crew was Masque de la Mobile, which lasted from 1704 to 1709 and handled coordinating Mardi Gras balls and parades in Mobile. In 1710, the Boeuf Gras Society took over, and they paraded a large bull's head through the streets. Boeuf Gras is French for the fatted cow, again alluding to the feast that was appropriate before saying goodbye to meat. Boeuf Gras ran the parade and ball in Mobile until 1861. By the time they yielded to the next organizer of things in Mobile, New Orleans was starting to hit its Mardi Gras stride.
Public Mardi Gras celebrations in New Orleans began in the 1730s, with the first elegant society balls happening in the 1740s. By the 1830s, public parades were happening, but the first real organized crew parade wasn't until 1857. That year, the Mystic Crew of Comus organized what we would recognize as the first real Mardi Gras parade. And, just to tie it all together, the Mystic Crew of Comus was founded by 6 young men who were originally from Mobile. The parades were canceled during the Civil War, but the Mystic Crew of Comus resumed their parade in 1866, and they were joined shortly thereafter by other crews. This was when things started taking off, and the crews began trying to outdo each other with ever more elaborate floats, costumes, and masks.
About 1870, crew members began tossing necklaces of beads from their floats to the bystanders. The exact reason for this isn't known, but one legend says this was started by a man who had dressed up as Santa Claus. Naturally, if he's Santa Claus, he ought to be distributing gifts. Well, the tradition stuck and became an essential part of all the parades.
Those first many years, the strings were beads of glass, so they were real jewelry. Today, the items tossed include strings of plastic or aluminum beads, as well as cups, doubloons, and other items like frisbees and coconuts. At some parades, the more venerable and well-to-do crews spend extra money on special items, such as, hand-painted coconuts, hand-painted shoes, medallions with the crew's name and the year stamped on them, and some very elaborate strings of beads. They are very sought after. In 1872, Mardi Gras festivities acquired their official colors of purple, green, and gold. But in a most unexpected way, it involves Russian nobility.
Yes, in 1872, Grand Duke Alexei Alexandrovich Romanov, the 22-year-old fourth son of the Tsar of Russia, came to the United States on a goodwill tour on behalf of his father. Local businessmen saw an opportunity. They created a new thing within the Mardi Gras festivities, the King of Carnival, who would preside over the day's activities and offered the Grand Duke the crown.
To help entice him, they declared his family colors as the official colors of Mardi Gras, declaring that purple stands for justice, green for faith, and gold for power. He agreed, and thus it has remained ever since.
Mardi Gras parades and events continued to become ever more elaborate over the years, and more crews meant more and more parades and balls. Nowadays, Mardi Gras is an official state holiday in Louisiana, While in Alabama, the two counties on the Gulf Coast, Baldwin and Mobile, also observe it as a holiday.
Mardi Gras itself ends with the Rex Ball as the king and queen and their court, basically the creme de la creme of New Orleans society, attend the high society event. The ball ends at the stroke of midnight when the curtains are drawn, thus ending Carnival and Mardi Gras with the beginning of Ash Wednesday.
Now, you actually went to Mardi Gras in New Orleans a number of years back and can attest that it is nothing like the common perception that people get from stories of the French Quarter.
Well, in the French Quarter, it is like those stories. But none of the parades take place on Bourbon Street or anywhere in the French Quarter because the streets are too narrow.
Yeah, you said that the parades are actually fairly family friendly. Lots of families come together.
Yeah, and if you want beads, it's actually a great strategy to position yourself next to kids.
Well, of course.
Yeah, and babies. You
Yeah.
get lots of them. I have a whole box. So I was in New Orleans because I have a friend who lived in New Orleans, and she told me that she was entering the convent. And I hadn't seen her for a while, so I said, well, I'll be there to see you on my next break. I was teaching school at the time, and my next break happened to coincide with the end of Carnival. Her father was in one of the krewes, and can't remember which one, but we were able to get out on a riser outside of his clubhouse and watch the Proteus and Orpheus parades going by. It was pretty amazing. Being elevated gave us a great view of those floats, and it was an awesome position to get lots of beads thrown at us. The Proteus crew was friends of her father's club, and so they made sure to send us extra beads.
Nice. And you came back with a huge box of
Yep.
beads, and, so you have the hardware to show it.
It was an amazing experience. And I started hosting Mardi Gras gatherings where I lived after being there. And now we do a big gala for our school on Mardi Gras too.
And we sure do. And actually, there's another carnival tradition that we absolutely need to mention, and we also incorporate into our Mardi Gras gala, and that is the king cakes.
Yes, king cake. For those unfamiliar, it's a circular cake made with a brioche dough that could be braided or could be rolled like a jelly roll, or neither of those. It could be flavored with cinnamon, cream cheese, or fruit fillings, or left plain. But what is consistent is that it is formed into a circle and iced with purple, green, and gold icing, or with white icing and sprinkled with purple, green, and gold sprinkles.
The odd and unique thing about the king cake is that a little something is baked into it to be found by one lucky person. Originally, that something was a dried bean or a token of some sort, but nowadays, most who make king cakes use a little plastic baby. They push it in after baking. Whoever gets the piece of cake with the baby was responsible, by some traditions, for bringing the king cake to the next gathering or to host the next gathering. The prize varied.
Oh, yeah. And well, let's be frank, king cake is delicious.
Yeah, it really is. There are bakeries in the New Orleans area that ship them for not much. We get a couple dozen shipped every year from Joe Gambino's bakery in New Orleans for the Mardi Gras Gala fundraiser for Hilltop Montessori School. That's the nonprofit school that we started in 2017 to benefit the children in our inner city neighborhood, and the king cakes are always a hit.
Carnival and Mardi Gras are biggest in New Orleans, Mobile, and other cities along the Gulf Coast, but the tradition spread to other cities in the United States over the years, especially to cities like St. Louis, which started out as French settlements, or that had large French populations. Nowadays, there are lots of cities with something like the parades and society balls that have characterized the celebration for centuries in Mobile and New Orleans. But the real story of Carnival and Mardi Gras is its place in the life of the faith. As we said, it isn't an official liturgical season like Lent or Advent, but it takes place between the great joyous season of Christmastide and the penitential season of Lent.
Yes, so it is part of the rhythm of the year. There are times to feast and times to fast, as well as times to abide in the glow of what has gone before, while preparing for the work that is to come. This space is where Carnival lives. It is a period when we can say, "Wasn't Christmas wonderful?" Ah, yes, and in these weeks after Epiphany, let us prepare for Lent.
So maybe this year, or maybe starting next year, give some thought to the Carnival season and the celebrations that culminate on Mardi Gras. We'll share some resources in our show notes, including a link to a good king cake recipe and a link to Joe Gambino's bakery if you'd like to order yourself a king cake straight from New Orleans. And most importantly, let the carnival season help you remember Christmas and Epiphany while preparing your heart and mind for Lent. This has been American Catholic History. If you enjoy American Catholic History, please become a supporter. We've got great perks for supporters. Get information on how to become a supporter and the perks at americancatholichistory.org/support.
Also on our website, sign up for our newsletters, see our merch, learn about Carnival and Mardi Gras, see about our pilgrimages, and find other great stories from American Catholic history.
We also love the great reviews our listeners leave. Those and the 5-star ratings help others find us. You can email us feedback, questions, tips for episode topics, and other comments at feedback@americancatholichistory.org. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/American Catholic History, on Instagram at ACH_podcast, and follow us on Twitter at ACH1513. I'm Noelle Heaster-Crowe.
And I'm Tom Crow.
Thank you once again for joining us on American Catholic History, made possible by listeners like you.
And make a spectacle of them in its own hedonistic ways, leaving the sacred farts far behind. Oh, there's an outtake.